Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research-based information that fits your family. I'm Lori Cordles, parent of 3 in 2 different life stages. 2 are launched and 1 is still in high school, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of 2 littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator. Today, we'll talk about the realities of raising a family and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. Hey everybody, welcome back.
Hi, here we are. And again, we're talking about the great guidance and discipline debate.
Yes, we still are. Last week we were looking at that positive parent-child relationship and how we use that word climate, the overall climate affected, our discipline and guidance and things. And so our suggested strategy was to have some positive interaction with our kids. And it is time to report back.
Reporting back on the homework, right?
Yes, on the homework.
Yes.
What did you do that was positive with your kids?
So I really, my children are older. And so for me, it's all about making that concerted, purposeful effort to touch base with them, to do some things intentionally with them. And so that's what I really wanted to do, especially with my middle daughter. I wanted to make some time to really just her and I go do something together, or even just to have a conversation because she's working. And so that was what I did. Is I made a couple different very purposeful and intentional efforts to reach out, have a conversation, go do things with her. And that was my out of podcast activity.
Yes. So mine, right? I was talking about how sometimes I talk negatively about my kids being loud, and I wanted to do something positive where it's like, you know what? Being intense and being loud isn't bad inherently. And we had a glow stick dance party. Maybe that's a technique you could use. I don't know. I bet your adults and emerging adults would love that.
They would love that. A glow stick dance party. Oh, I know they would.
But it was just, glow sticks. Hey, parenting hack. Glow sticks and balloons are basically always somewhere in my house for like desperate times for entertainment with our young kids.
Yes.
But so we just turn the music up loud, and that is one nice thing about it being a little darker earlier in the winter. Might be the only nice thing in my opinion, but okay. But so yeah, we had a glow stick little dance party.
Oh, fun. Oh, yeah. That's great. All right. So, this week we're going to keep moving on, right? And so remember that our research citations this season are coming from a book called The Handbook of Parenting. Yes, there is a handbook for parenting, right? So we have volume 5, and it's called The Practice of Parenting, and it's edited by Mark Borenstein. And specifically, we're looking at the chapter on child discipline by Dr. Jennifer Lansford. And I think, if I recall correctly, that Mackenzie even has some specific paraphrase quote that she wants to share right now, right up front.
Yeah, I couldn't wait. Usually we at least get through some of this intro stuff, and it's like, no, right here, right now.
Right here, right now.
So yeah, I loved the way that Lansford described this goal of parenting discipline. We're in episode 5. We've been talking about this for a few weeks. And in the first episode, we defined discipline. It's like, okay, pause. Let's look at the purpose. So the ultimate goal of discipline, of parenting discipline, is to teach kids how to behave in desired ways, even in the absence of rewards and punishment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so then she kind of goes on to say what we want, we want them to behave because of an internalized set of values and standards rather than just the presence of an authority figure. And, I kind of paraphrase a little piece of that, but yeah, that we're working towards our kids internalizing these values, not just you listen because I'm here and I said so, but you behave this way when I'm not around because you believe it too.
Ooh,
right?
Exactly.
In my world, it's important we don't hit. Yes. I hope you don't hit when I'm not around.
Yes. Like, I want you to be this super cool human being, even if I'm not there, giving you the stink eye, right?
Yes. So
please.
I just thought that was a good place. It's like, okay, we're going to be looking at how we break this down a little. Got to remember, we're looking towards internalized values. That it's the way they behave because they think it's important.
Exactly. So today, though, we're going to specifically take a look at discipline by our kids' age, right? So we're going to keep their skills and their abilities in mind as we really think about what types of discipline strategies we can use.
Mhm.
So, as we think about this, well, why don't you share the first research tidbit with us?
Yes. So this is not a definition. Oh, kind of a definition
Yeah,
in some ways,
maybe sort of.
right? A little bit. So there's this term, right, called developmentalist perspective. The developmentalist perspective. And so I guess I am kind of going to define it. Basically, you hear us talk this way all the time. It's
Yes.
our approach, it's our perspective to parenting in many ways. But the way that Thompson and Bommerand define it was that the developmentalist perspective argues that what constitutes our kids' best interest. So, what's in our kids' best interest is going to vary based on their age, right? That what a toddler
Absolutely.
needs is not always what a preteen needs. And so, as parents, we need to take into account the real differences in their abilities and their needs in terms of how we will distribute privileges, rewards, and responsibilities. Now, that is not like, I mean, it's a little languagey, but it's not a brand new idea, right?
No.
That we will consider our kids' abilities and needs in the way that we discipline, in the way that we parent them. And so
Mhm.
that's the developmentalist perspective. It's like, hey, let's consider what they're capable of. Let's consider cognitively how much self-control they have, right? Because that is very different charts for a toddler and for a teen.
Exactly, exactly. So, okay, well, you have a preschooler and a toddler, and have you changed your approach as your children have gotten older?
I would say there's okay, hitting is just like on my mind right now.
Yeah.
In part, okay, fess up. In part because as we've been recording this season and like putting these pieces together, that's what I've been reflecting on.
Yes.
Is like so all of this conversation around discipline, hitting is what we're really working on around here.
Yes.
But so I even think about the difference between how I would address hitting when my child was like 9 to 12 months, right? So like a baby that's hitting,
Mhm.
um, that what I would typically do for discipline would be like distracting or trying to change the situation or like you're intervening in a different way versus now that my child is an older toddler and might even be a preschooler next year. Now it's a little more of like reasoning and understanding and it's just different than just like the modeling nice touches,
Right.
right? It's different than that now that he's a toddler.
Yes. Yes.
So, what about you? What's a time when like similar situation but the different ages called for different kinds of discipline and guidance techniques?
Yeah, so I think that probably I really, especially last week, was thinking about homework, right? So
Mm.
with my high schooler, I do not hover over her homework.
Mhm.
Maybe as an elementary school age child and as a preteen middle school, I definitely helped in a way for them to think about their homework, the importance of it, made a time for them to do their homework. As they grew, maybe encourage them to finish their homework.
Mm.
And now, as a high schooler, well, homework is super important if she has plans to do things, after high school. And so, my role there is different because you know, I let those natural consequences happen if she doesn't get her homework done. And so I
Yes.
think that based developmentally on that age of, from early school to middle school to high school, my role as the homework hoverer has changed the guidance and discipline in
Yes.
that way, So that I think that is a key for me. And
Yeah.
just because it's very on my mind, like you said,
Mm.
it's been on my
It's
mind. Homework.
present.
It's present.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, and I think that's a good example of when kids are younger, they haven't established like homework routines,
Mhm.
they haven't had the practice. And so like, yeah, their ability and their knowledge, they needed a little more guidance. And then yeah, that as they get older, they don't need as much. And so your
No.
technique can shift a little of like,
Yes.
hope
It's
you get
your
it done.
responsibility, not my hope you get done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you mentioned there was a test yesterday, but I'm wondering when that
Uh,
homework got done for the test. Yeah. Yeah. And
yes.
again, just that idea of natural consequences is super important, I think.
Yes, yes. And so as we look at, this developmentalist perspective of how we can tailor our parenting to our kids' needs, again, related to discipline and guidance, let's take a look at what changes as kids develop. So we actually have like a two-part. research tidbit here. So you give the first half.
Okay, so I'll give the first half. And this really has to do with the idea that as children grow and develop, as their, brain grows and develops along with them, they begin to understand that their parent actually might have some knowledge
Some.
right? Some knowledge about their guidance and discipline practices, right? So my parent actually has some knowledge and skills about why they don't want me to do this particular thing or why they want me to behave a specific way. And it's not just about my parent's power. So the child, as they grow, they start to recognize that the parent does have a reason behind trying to guide, redirect the misbehavior.
Yes. Well, and it shifts that, I think of how they look at parents too, of when they're younger, it's like the person who I get in trouble from,
Right.
right? Versus as our kids get older, school age, preteens, teenagers, it's more about rather than I just get in trouble, it's more about like, there's a reason for this. And
Yes.
the way I value my parent is because they have knowledge and skills.
Yes.
And I think that's different.
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It is. And they do start to recognize it even if they tell you that you don't have knowledge or skills behind the reasons.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But the research does tell us that is the case, right? That it's
Yes.
not just when they're younger, it is a little bit more about understanding the rewards and punishments. And that's what parents do. But as they get older, they do understand, my parents have knowledge and skills, and that's why I trust them.
Yes.
And so I think that's an interesting shift. So
Yes.
part one is how our kids change and how that
Mhm.
affects our discipline as they develop. Part two is how parents change, right? So we've talked about the parenting stages in one of our seasons
Mhm.
that I really enjoyed, and now I cannot remember the number of. Mackenzie DeYoung will help us out.
Yes. Yes.
But on the flip side, as kids develop, we are changing our approach to discipline too, because we start to appeal as kids get older to things more like humor and
Mhm.
guilt and responsibility.
Mhm.
And that's because we tend to believe that older kids have more self-control. And so that their misbehaviors are deliberate. That's how Collins and their colleagues put it back in 2002 in their study, was that we tend to believe that their misbehaviors are deliberate. So that means we start to treat them a little bit more like an adult, in my opinion, right? If
Mhm.
I wanted something, if I want my coworker to do a specific task or something, I'm probably not just going to assert my power. One, because if they're my peer, I don't have
Yeah.
any power to assert. Maybe that's a factor.
A little.
But the way that we interact with adults, right? We ask them to do things. We appeal to
Mhm.
their responsibility or their cooperation, or we're funny, right? And humor. And I think so as our kids get older, because we understand their behavior is more intentional, we
Mhm.
treat them differently. And so it goes from like, you don't know better when they're little to, you know better now, that was a deliberate choice. And so I think just
Yes.
understanding that like our kids are changing how they view us, and we are changing how we view our kids as they get
Yes.
older. And then both
Yes.
of those things affect our discipline. Mhm.
They do. They do. And I think that it's important to recognize as we look at their development that we don't make that assumption too quickly,
Oh,
right?
yes.
That we don't expect that from them before they actually can handle that developmentally. So
Yes.
let's talk about
Mhm.
how about that? Let's talk
Can we
about
pause for just a
development.
second? Let's talk
Yes.
about that brain development and that impulse
Yes.
control. I know you love cognitive and brain
Yes.
development. And so like this little breakdown of, we know that kids don't necessarily have great self impulse control, right?
Mhm.
The impulse to hit, the impulse, right? Or not to hit, hopefully.
Yes.
That is all I can talk about lately, huh? But we know that our kids don't have great impulse control until at least age 4. And
Yes.
even then, not great. That's like when it's starting to develop.
Just barely, right? And
Just
then
barely.
as if they are under stress, if they are sick, if we are stressed, if we are sick, those self-control monitors drop dramatically. And so
Yes.
where, maybe we had some self-control, now it's the beginning of school and we're
Mm.
super overwhelmed and stressed. And as a child, I have suddenly, limited self-control again. So
Yes.
that self-control is a growth process, a developmentally, just exactly what we're
Mhm.
talking about today. And so thinking about that expectation as children grow.
Definitely. Well, and the impulse control of our young kids. And yeah, okay, let's say by age 5, they're okay at it, pretty good at it because it started to develop, still not there all the time. But then even our teens who it's like, okay, their impulse control is more developed,
Mhm.
but their ability to process and anticipate consequences of a choice,
Mhm.
still not awesome.
And their hormones suddenly
Yes.
mix everything up. Yes.
Yes. And so I do. I think that's an important context as was like as we were chatting through that, I was like, wait,
Wait.
that brain development here is an important part of how we what we assume about those things
Mhm.
affects how we respond to our kids' misbehaviors.
It does.
And so that's such a great caution of like, wait, hold on. It's so easy to assume they are way more
Mhm.
skilled at this than they are.
Yeah.
But
Lower
yeah,
the bar.
yes, let's
Lower the
dig into
bar.
these
All
these
right. So
different ages.
the different ages. So we're going to look at some specific research in terms of, the reality of disciplining around different ages. So what we're going to do is we decided to share our two favorite strategies for each age, right? So
Mhm.
we're going to start with infants and toddlers, and I'm going to start with my two favorite strategies when it comes to guidance and discipline for infants and toddlers. And
Mhm.
I love a good redirect and distract, right? I love a good redirect and distract, especially because when it comes to brain development, they just don't know. They don't know.
Yes.
Like they can look at you with that look in their eye, that little gleam that says, I'm gonna go do this right here and I'm gonna pull this cat's ear and I'm looking at you. But you know what? Redirect and distract. So remove the cat, distract them
Mhm.
from the danger. Um, Give them something more interesting to look at. Sometimes, if you actually got down on the floor and looked at what our infants and toddlers had to look at, I mean, there are some super cool things on the floor, right? I mean, really,
Yes.
if you, or it's a plain white wall down there. So, really
Mhm.
thinking about, okay, their brain development at this age is, no self control. And I am the responsible adult. So I will take the time to redirect and distract and provide a safe environment, frankly. It's
Oh,
all on me. It's all on me at that
that's
age,
why this is
period.
exhausting.
End. Exactly.
That's why this is exhausting.
Yes. How about
Uh,
you?
okay, so my favorite 2, living with a toddler in my house myself. But yeah, one is just modeling,
Mhm.
right? So like, oh, we don't pull the cat's ear, we use nice
Yes.
touches, right? Or even like modeling interactions for a toddler of like, oh, I want a turn.
Mm.
So it's modeling those types of strategies. So modeling is a big one that I think we show them a lot. And one reason I think it's important, I mean, we can model at any age, but especially for infants and toddlers, is because they might not always have that like receptive language. They might not
Mhm.
always know what we're saying. And so we can show them. So
Yes.
modeling is one. And then my other one, which again, not like wildly profound, is just praise. I was like,
Yes.
"Oh, we did it!" Right? "Oh, I loved your nice touches." Or, "Oh," like the things with the cat or
Yeah.
the just the simple things that our kids are doing and the excitement. We do this naturally in some things, right? Like, "Oh, you're walking, yay!" But thinking intentionally about how we can use that strategy of praise to do the behaviors that we want them to do.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that's my infant toddler. So then that brings us to preschoolers.
It
I
does.
could not pick 2. I
Oh,
have I have 3, but you can go
okay.
first because you followed
Uh,
the rules.
Okay, yeah, and what a switch, right? Usually you're
Yeah,
more the real follower than
right?
I am,
I'm the
right?
rule breaker.
So, yeah,
Look at
yeah.
this.
Oh, okay, so I know that as a preschool teacher, one of my big strategies was to simply ignore. And I
Mm,
know that some people might go,
mhm.
but at this age, developmentally, they're practicing a lot. They're practicing new and exciting words and looking for shock value. They might be practicing interactions. They might be practicing grammar and how to phrase things. And they might be practicing how to tell stories, whether the stories are factual or not factual, right? And so much of what I did with the preschool guidance and discipline had to do with just ignoring
Mhm.
the shock value, ignoring it, and just allowing that practice to happen as long as it wasn't harmful to others, right?
Yes.
And then my second strategy, I think you probably are gonna say, "Oh, of course," is humor.
Oh, yes.
I love creating humor opportunities with preschoolers. I love using humors to diffuse highly emotional situations. I
Mhm.
love using humor as a way to come back to a regulated emotional control. I love using humor as a way to soften the wow, like, "Ooh, that
Mm,
was that was you're really very sorry for that, and I know that you feel very bad, you're shaming yourself. I'm not gonna shame you. I'm gonna bring humor into this so that
yes.
you know that, we're back together, like, we restart. We got
Yes.
to reset, redo, and that's how I use humor."
Oh, I love that. Okay, so mine, many of which you've heard me talk about before. So this probably won't surprise anybody. One is the opportunity for like visual schedules, visual
Mhm,
routines, social stories, whatever kind of technique I think is so important for preschoolers as they learn the routines and the consistency of life and that
mhm,
visual, right? They're not readers yet most of the time. And
right.
so, I mean, most of the
Yes.
time. And so the picture, it teaches them kind of what to expect as well as what we expect. And I think that's
Mhm,
really important as we think about them learning their roles. That's a huge part of preschool is like gender roles, racial roles, what's
mhm,
important for a teacher, what's important for a student, what's important for mom, what's important for dad, kids, etc. And so I think those are a great tool to help communicate our expectations. Another one that y'all have heard me say before is, "What's your plan?"
yes.
So this is sometimes when we might be in disagreement of, "I don't wanna do that right now," or, "I don't wanna." Okay, what's your plan? We like, the expectation is clearly we need to pick up, or we have to go to bed before blank, or right? So the expectation is not changing. What's your plan for meeting it
Exactly.
if you're not going with what I'm suggesting? So that's
Yes.
another big one that kind of helps diffuse and anticipate what might turn into a lot of times what I might even call a disobedience
Hmm,
situation. It's like,
sure,
well, the disobedience is you're not doing it this way. And this kind of diffuses that of like, it's not about disobedience, it's about cooperation. So I
sure.
love the what's your plan. But then this one, again, like I said, I couldn't do two. I came up with a
It's
third
okay.
one, couldn't let it
That's
go.
alright.
Um, I think the opportunity for preschoolers is the calm communication after. Like,
Yes.
after a
Yes.
tantrum, after a meltdown, like, after maybe both of us got
Mhm,
wound. I think, as toddlers, they maybe didn't have, like, the attention span and the language. Our preschoolers a lot of times do. And so it's
mhm.
that kind of first age where we have that opportunity to, like, process afterwards, "Okay, this is what happened. What could be different next time?" Or, "You know what?
Yes.
I should have been." Or so I think that process, that calm processing, again, not in the middle of a meltdown when things are heated, but afterwards about and teaching what maybe desired or how we could have behaved differently too. And I just
Mhm.
love that. I love that
Yes.
opportunity in preschoolers.
Yes. We needed all 3.
Yeah,
We
okay,
needed
good,
yeah.
thanks. I like
We
them.
needed all
I love
3.
them.
But, those really drive forward the next age, that school
Mm,
age, and so, you just really led me right into so I'm gonna go right ahead and move
do it.
into my favorite school age strategies, and that honestly has to do with giving them more decisions.
Mm,
So, when it comes to guiding them, I want to guide them to have more practice at decision making. I want them to be able to practice and I want them to be able to fail at decision making when I'm
mm,
right there to support them.
yes.
I want them to have practice at making the wrong decision. I want them to choose the wrong thing on the menu and decide, "Wow, I really didn't like that." But you know what? That's okay because now I can share
Yes.
with you or we can do something else. And
Yes.
along with those decisions come the opportunity for them to decide their own consequences. So
Mm,
that's my second favorite strategy is
mhm.
having input from them on, well, what are the consequences when I misbehave? What are the consequences and what do they look like? And myself as a school ager, I actually got to decide on them. So when I misbehave, this is what I decided on. What the heck was I thinking? Right. And so
Yes.
both of those things go together. The decisions, making more decisions, practicing making more decisions, And then when there's misbehavior, I, as the school ager, got input into what my consequences were.
Mm, I love that. So you kind of led me to mine. So one of the things we think about with school agers, one, they're starting to spend more time not directly with us, right? They're in
Mhm.
school, they're in practice, they're at their friend's house, and so they spend more time away from us and away from the authority figure, if you will.
Yes.
But the other important thing that's happening for school agers is this idea of like moral development, right? Like
Mhm.
what I think is right and wrong, and whether or not, right, that moral development affects how I behave, not with my parent. So
Yes.
that's, those two are tied right together. But so, because of that moral development that you were kind of hinting at,
Mhm.
deciding their own consequences, I really love. I find myself, my daughter is in kindergarten. So, she's a young school ager, right off the cusp of preschooler. But
Mhm.
I already find myself saying things like, what do you think about
Mm.
blank? And
Mhm.
so, it might be things related to our family values, like, oh, I see in this book that so and so did this and this, or I noticed that it seemed like they treated this person differently, or,
Mhm.
but those things that relate to our family values. And instead of saying that was not okay, or the explanation of our values that I maybe would have done a little when she was a little younger, I now find myself asking more about, what do you think about the fact that they left
Mm.
so and so out? And even as
Sure.
she tells me stories about how things went at school, and instead of me jumping in, it's like, "That was not okay." Like, "What do you think about? How do you think
Mhm.
so and so felt? What do you?" And so that opportunity for more input and their own values and understanding. So those conversations around like, "What do you think about this situation?"
I love
is a
that.
big one for me. And then, the other one, which I don't know, this is the thing I've been very into lately, is helping my kids find specific language. And I think
Mm.
that's important for school agers. And so because they're in these different contexts, right? So like, okay, I know the rules at home. I know some of them, maybe I have like a classroom contract or class rules. What about at practice? What about here and here? And so helping my kids navigate conflict or whatever it might be. And so helping them like, okay, I didn't like when so and so did this, and I maybe, I'm gonna say hit. No, I didn't hit. I yelled. I something else. I walked away. I whatever. But helping them like find phrases like "I disagree"
Mhm.
or "I don't like that" or "I don't want to play that way." But I think that's another thing that I think about being proactive,
Yes.
and maybe I, instead of saying it was not okay that you did this, and instead it's like, okay, next time what could we say, and then giving that language together. And so
Mhm.
that's been, I mean, yeah, the specific language for situations, because they're going to different contexts and new ways that they weren't when they were younger.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what do you think about that? And finding specific languages or
Ex
language for
I love
situations
it.
are my
I
school
love it.
agers.
And
Yeah.
especially as they're growing, they're gaining access to more language and learning how to use it appropriately, right?
Yes.
Which brings us right into the preteens and the teens, all
Yeah.
about language, right? I'm all about respect and
Yes.
especially using respectful language with
Mhm.
adults. And so I would say if I had two strategies, again, they go right hand in hand. That mutually respectful behavior, tone, voice, language. I
Yes.
would want to make sure that I was modeling that for my teen and preteen. I will speak to you respectfully, and I in turn expect you to speak to me respectfully.
Mhm.
And modeling that, showing them that I also am going to follow those values, follow those rules. And then the second strategy is one that we use a lot with a different sorts of curriculums that we have,
Yes.
not only just in parenting, but in our Powerful Tools for Caregivers program. We use this strategy, and it's called iMessages. And so I think that especially with teens and preteens, it's super important to use those iMessages. And it might go like this. So let's say that my teenager is with her friends, and they're standing in the kitchen, and all of a sudden she uses kind of a snarky voice with me and is a tad disrespectful. I believe as a parent it is my right to address that snarky tone in front of her friends. So I think iMessages are super important in this situation. This is a great strategy to use. I might say something like, wow, when I hear you use that snarky tone, I'm disappointed because I know that you can speak to me more respectfully, and I really want to speak respectfully to you.
Mhm.
Now, sometimes as a parent, we feel at odds with ourselves and we think we
Mm.
can't address our teens' behavior in front of their friends. Well, I might disagree with that and say, actually, that's a
Yes.
perfect opportunity for you to model what is the behavior that you want? Just like we do with toddlers and
Mhm.
preschoolers and school agers, the same thing with teens and preteens. Modeling the tone that you want, modeling the
Yes.
language that you want, modeling how you want them to speak to you, how you want them to speak to their friends, how you want them to speak to others, other adults at school, etc. And so those are my favorite strategies, just that, you
Yes.
know, mutually respectful behaviors, tones, as well as those I messages.
Yes, and that it can be as simple as, like, "I expect you to speak respectfully to me.
Mhm,
I
exactly.
expect you to be honest with me." And that would be language that you would be comfortable with them using with somebody else,
Mhm,
right? Like,
absolutely.
"I expect when I offer to give you a ride that you show up on time."
Yes.
Right? That can be something they could say to a friend.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that, and the I messages, yeah, they can be simple. "I
Mhm,
expect, I need, I saw."
mhm.
Oh, love that. Okay. So mine, one is we know one thing we see about teens is the importance of their relationship with peers increases. Now that does not mean that they view their parents as less important. It just means they're spending more and more time with their friends.
Yes.
So we know that time together with their as a parent can be fleeting in the teen years. And so I think finding those intentional positive moments is really important with teens.
Mhm.
And, not having my children are not teens and preteens yet, but having lived with an emerging adult for a
Yes.
while, I feel like I get to speak a little bit of truth here. Um, but that opportunity of like, even if it's just sitting down and talking about something funny that happened,
Mhm.
right? This does not need to be like wild, crazy all night board game. I mean, that's great, but it can be as simple as watching a show you both like or listening to a song you both like in the car, but finding opportunities to be intentional with your teens because that time is coming and going a lot with the
Yes.
stuff that they're often involved in. And then my other one is just like shared problem solving and negotiation with our teens. We know that as they get closer and closer to being adults themselves, they're going to be making those decisions without our help. And
Mhm.
so that practice of problem solving together and honestly, I would even say negotiating. Y
Absolutely.
I think about, like, curfew, and every family handles this a little different, but, "Okay, I was thinking tonight I want you to be home by blank." There's a nice statement. "I want you to be home by 11." Um, "Okay, well, mom, the movie won't be done until
Mhm.
11:15. I couldn't get home in time."
Yes.
Okay. So what's your plan? What are you thinking? Right. And just those conversations about how we can problem solve and come to things together because our teens do have ideas and reasons and input. Let's let them practice that with us. And it
Yes.
shows them, hopefully, what a respectful relationship can look like in a romantic relationship, in a friendship, in a relationship with like with a professor or whoever. It teaches them about respect in relationships, which
It does.
here I am talking about respect. What?
Respect.
Stealing Lori's favorite term.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. But so we really just wanted to break down, we've had whole seasons looking at ages and stages and breaking them down, but looking specifically at discipline. What are the important factors that influence discipline and, how our kids change as they grow, how we change, what perspective we take, and then the specific strategies and why that's what I mean, just the two of us, these are just personal preferences. This was our reality and what our kind of informed approach says. But we just wanted to share some strategies that help us break that down a little. So this does bring us to our kind of strategies for the week. Now, we just broke them down by age, so we
We
kind of
did, we
already
did.
got ahead of ourselves. But really, we still think you're out of class activity
Yes.
or you're not homework.
Yes.
The strategy for this week is really just to think about your child and the age they're at, maybe a behavior you feel like you're addressing a lot, like hitting, 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 hitting. Um, a behavior you feel like you're addressing a lot. And what's that maybe go-to response? What's the default?
Mhm.
And maybe how can you tailor it a little more? specifically to your child's age and abilities. So
Yes.
again, using that developmentalist perspective
Mhm.
of how can we tailor more to our child's age?
Yes.
So, all right, let's do some examples, Lori. You got one?
Okay,
Uh,
so I mine is all about intentionality, right? So
yes.
my kids are older and it's easy for us to all just go about our own business,
Mm,
all doing our own thing,
mhm.
waving at each other from the car door as we,
Yes.
drive by. And so just intentional, 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 finding those intentional
Mm.
moments, making them purposeful. How about
Oh,
you?
love that. So, again, hitting,
Hitting,
hitting.
hitting.
Um, but again, yeah, this is what I've really been looking at as we've been doing this podcast season. I'm like, wait, this is a thing we could do more to address. And so I've been starting to understand a little bit more about why my toddler is hitting. That
Mm,
sometimes he's hitting to maybe get someone's attention. Maybe
mhm.
sometimes he's hitting honestly to be playful. He might hit when we're like singing a silly song together or and so I think the thing that I've been kind of tailoring to his age a little more is
Yes.
understanding the different needs he's trying to get met with hitting. And
Yes.
then that actually sometimes it's not, right? We're trying to teach the desired behavior instead of just addressing the undesired. So, oh, we don't hit, we use nice touches. But the actual desired behavior is different depending on the reason for it, right? So if he's hitting
Absolutely.
to be playful, like, "Oh, I love playing with you," we don't hit. Instead, maybe we tickle or do silly
Mhm.
faces or right? And so that is the desired behavior for being playful versus you want that back.
Yes.
Instead of, "Oh, we don't hit," right? It's also, "Oh, we use nice touches when we play." And you can tell your sister, "I want a turn." Right?
Mhm.
And so for my toddler being an older toddler now, I feel like the way I'm starting to tailor a little more is what is the reason we hit? And then that there's different desired behaviors based on that reason. So that's
Absolutely.
been, and he's old enough now that we can get into that a little more and we
Mhm.
can ask questions like, did you want to turn? Are you hurt? Are you mad? And we can get an answer.
Mhm. Yes.
So that's how we've been tailoring a little bit on the hitting. And fingers crossed that in future
I'm gonna
seasons, I
check
will
in with
report
you.
back
Yes.
way less
Less
hitting.
hitting. Oh gosh. All right.
Um,
So I think that brings us into our stop, breathe, talk space in our episode. And this week we are going to have our writer, Barb Dunn Swanson, join us. Welcome, Barb. We're so happy you're with us today.
Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for having me back with you. You've both been doing such a great job detailing just the intricacies between what we can do and how we can relate to kids depending on their age. Such
Mhm.
mm,
such important work and such an important topic. The one thing that I keep going back to is connection.
Mm.
mm.
Remember several, seasons ago, we looked at those 6 or 7 Cs, Mackenzie, what was
Oh,
it?
yes.
7 C's:
Seven
confidence,
C's.
confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, control.
Way to go. Way to
Don't
go.
you know that all of those Cs could be connected right back to guiding and discipline of
Mm.
children
Oh,
You're
yes.
right.
in such a meaningful way? Let's
Mhm,
talk just simply about connection first off.
mhm,
And especially when you think of those young ones, the toddlers, the
Mhm.
preschoolers, they still are so yearning for connection with us.
mhm,
As they get older, we might see them, like you mentioned in this season, as today's session, you said they're getting more independent. And so they're spending more time
Mhm.
with their peers. But those young ones, they still want to connect with us. So, what does that mean for how we guide them? It means that we might have more opportunity for snuggles when
Yay.
something has happened.
Yay.
We
yes,
might just have to snuggle and talk through what the situation looked like, what behavior was undesired, and then talk through what you want to see happen. And you've already said it. You've been talking through it beautifully, but giving them that room to connect.
Mhm.
And then the piece we didn't talk about so specifically, but that we've talked about in other podcast sessions is repair.
Mm.
mm,
That is the word I was looking for. What is that word?
You couldn't say it earlier.
I
There
did
it is,
not.
Barb.
I couldn't find it. Oh, thank you, Barb. Yes.
Well,
Yes.
all of us have to repair from time to time. Knowing when to say, you know what? We need to talk through this situation. This behavior was just unacceptable, but I know you can make a better decision, and I want to work with you to get to that decision. So in
Yes.
other words, you're not expecting a child to do it alone. You're not even expecting your teenager to do it alone.
No.
As the parent, we're willing to talk you through it. And it goes back to what both of you have been talking about, the reasoning ability. As those kids get older, they can reason through some things, and we don't expect them to be perfect.
No.
No, but we do expect them to be willing to communicate with us, keeping that line of communication open, and then finding the strategy or the consequence that, number one, is meaningful,
Yes.
that
Yes.
changes that undesired behavior, but that causes us to reflect and yet have self-esteem on the opposite side. Like to come through it without feeling really bad about ourselves, but really feeling like I've learned something and I can do something differently next time.
Repair. I love it. Thank you. Yes. That was the
Connection and repair,
word.
such an important part in the connection with our littles and with our, right? It looks different
Yes.
with our older kids, but it's there too.
Absolutely. Keep going. You've had so many strategies that we can use and so many ideas that we might not have thought about before, but if we just stop and listen to one another, we can have a strategy going forward. So thank you for working through some of these more difficult topics.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank
Connection
you,
and
Barb.
repair.
You're
Totally gonna
welcome.
remember. Yep.
Yes, those are throughout all the ages for sure.
Absolutely.
Oh, excellent. Well, I mean, yeah, we've been digging into how discipline looks different at the different ages of our kids. And I think the other thing that we haven't mentioned yet that I feel like we can't get through this episode without saying is that it's not always this like black and white line between toddlerhood and preschool, right? Or
Yes.
between school age and preteen.
Yes.
And, so that we have this opportunity to mesh between our strategies, but that we can lean back into some of the things earlier in the seasons of we can lean into cooperative strategies. We can lean into inductive reasoning. And that's a lot of what we talked through. We looked at specific things, but they lean back into that because it's not just, oh, you're a preteen, now I need to this. Oh, you're a teen, now I need to this. And so I want a message like, make sure that we acknowledge that it's not always a straight line or not always a black and white line, but we get to lean back into those general things across the different ages, but we'll also keep that developmentalist perspective.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So what's next? Well, what you all have been waiting for, deciding on discipline strategies for different situations, right? That's next week. Okay. So next week, hang in there. We are going to talk about how do we decide on which strategy for which situation.
Yes, and that's going to wrap up our whole season. So we know you've been waiting for it. We weren't ready to tell you about it till we said everything else we've said.
Yes.
But next week it's coming.
Yes. So thanks for joining us today on the Science of Parenting podcast. And hey, if you enjoy our content, please do take a moment, give us a 5-star rating on our podcast app, on your podcast app, not ours. It's our podcast, your app, right? This helps more people find our podcast, and it helps the people above us show that this is worth our time and energy.
So yes, thank you. Please do give us a rating and come along with us as we tackle the ups and downs, the ins and outs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is hosted by Lori Kothals and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung, with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.